Well, welcome to this little discussion of organizing. I'm really honored to be part of this and happy to talk about the Zen of organizing. This is a topic that's near and dear to me. This little presentation will not be a comprehensive exposition of the legal aspects of organizing or the do's and don'ts of organizing. This will be a simple exposition that hopefully will give organizers, particularly new organizers, some standard and simple guideposts to thinking about organizing. I call it the Zen of organizing, and I've actually borrowed this term from a dear friend of mine who was an organizer who worked for me in the Portland, Columbia River region of the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, where I was organizing director for about 20 years. Her name is Mary Winzig, and she was a bookstore worker at Powell's Books in Portland, Oregon, and she was part of our organizing committee there that organized 450 independent bookstore workers into the International Longshore and Warehouse Union. And she's the one who said to me, you know, Peter, organizing this bookstore is different than organizing a bunch of dock workers or a bunch of warehouse workers. But she said there's a Zen of organizing. And the Zen of organizing is that all organizing is the same, but all organizing is different. And I think that's a beautiful expression of an approach to thinking about organizing. Because some people will say, well, this situation is very different. A bookstore is very different. Well, a bookstore is different, but there are certain principles to organizing that remain the same everywhere. And I think those two principles are what I call the two H's: heat and hammer. Heat and hammer are the two H's that I think about when I approach an organizing situation. So let's talk about the two H's briefly. Heat is nothing more than what its name implies: stoking the passion, the heat, and the fervor of workers to embrace the organizing mission. Organizing a union, organizing a workplace takes incredible courage. And in order to overcome the kind of obstacles that are going to be thrown in your way by an employer, you need a lot of heat. You need a lot of commitment. You need a lot of passion. And the basic work of an organizer is to stoke those passions, to build those passions, to build anger, because often anger is the key to overcoming fear. So a good organizer thinks about how do we motivate workers? And this is a talent that can be taught and learned, but often it's intrinsic to somebody's character that they have that kind of ability. So in order to stoke that heat and the passion among a broad array of workers, you need a committed core of people who are organizers in the workplace. An outside organizer can help guide the process and inspire people, but fundamentally, to move a group of workers, you need workers in that workplace who share the work life of their fellow workers and are able to motivate and move them. That's a committed core of people, often called a militant minority. People are really committed to organizing, willing to take risks, willing to move the workforce. So those are the elements of heat: that passion, that ability to stand up, to ditch the fear, to face off with the boss and ditch the fear. So those are some of the elements of heat. And a good organizer is constantly thinking about how to do that. How do you overcome fear? How do you provide that passion and that leadership so that workers stand up and fight for themselves? And I've seen it happen in many different workplaces, and it takes many different forms. People are often outraged about many different things. I've done a lot of work organizing among immigrant workers, mostly Latino immigrants to the LA basin. And a lot of times these workers were sparked to move and to organize, and often in very militant fashion, not by the pay, not by the lack of benefits, but by an insult to their dignity, a foreman telling them they're worthless pieces of shit. Oftentimes that is what motivated those workers to stand up and fight. Similarly, in the bookstore in Portland that I referenced before, what motivated a lot of those workers was when the ownership of the bookstore decided that no longer Would you be assigned to a particular subject area in the bookstore where you would develop expertise, say in travel books, and help customers with travel books? But now everyone was going to become an ombudsman and deal with everything. Well, that insult to people's historical focus on developing expertise is what moved a lot of those workers to want to organize. It wasn't the pay, wasn't the benefits, albeit those were both rotten. It was that insult to their dignity. So I hope I've given you a sense of what heat is. Look for heat, look for passion, stoke it and fire it. That's one key element of organizing. But even with all that heat and all that passion, we still need a winning formula. And the other part of a winning formula is the hammer. And organizers who have been plying this trade for a long time refer to that as leverage. In other words, oftentimes it's not enough that workers are united and together. They need a way to bring their power to bear and force their employer to deal with them. Now, sometimes walking out on strike can do that. But sometimes we don't have the ability to walk out on strike, or the employer is in such a position that the strike does not damage their business operations enough to force them to come to heel. For instance, workers in a museum setting, who work at a museum, an art museum, if they've organized a union, one way for them to develop leverage is to develop an outreach program to the boards of directors, the people that run the museum, to reach out to them, to make a personal plea to them, to get them on their side, so that when it comes to the question of whether the museum management is going to deal with the union, if the board of directors is saying, hey, these people deserve better, that is the leverage we need to push things over the top. And so these are the two factors, heat and hammer. Now, sometimes on the waterfront, for instance, our longshore workers have the kind of leverage necessary that if they unite, if they shut down a dock, that the economic damage is so severe that that employer recognizes the union or deals with the union and deals with the needs of those workers. But sometimes we don't have that kind of leverage and we have to look elsewhere. So it's important to understand both of those factors. They interpenetrate. If you develop leverage, outside leverage, and support, that often gives those workers a greater sense of confidence in their ability to do things because they feel like somebody has their back. At the same time, if outside supporters see the passion and the commitment of those workers, for instance, here in Los Angeles, we're looking at the possibility of a supermarket strike coming up any day now. If those workers walk out on strike, 100% out on the picket lines, walking, protesting, chanting, singing, yelling, and other workers see that kind of passion and commitment, that inspires them to be part of the battle. And I know what will happen here in the South Bay is that the ILWU will adopt supermarkets and go out there and picket with those workers, help fund their needs while they're on strike. And part of the reason they do that is they see a highly visible, motivated workforce on strike. That inspires them. So heat and hammer always interpenetrate, and good organizers are always thinking about how to weld those pieces together for a successful organizing campaign. So that's my 47 years of experience in organizing distilled into 5 minutes of a little chat here. And I hope it's helpful to organizers. For expert advice on the law and for some of the detailed steps in the organizing process, there are plenty of manuals. But if you want to be a passionate, successful organizer, I would commend those two variables to you, heat and hammer, and you can practice the Zen of organizing.